Welcome to Films and Stuff with your hosts, Pete Mitchell and Ethan Hunt.
Okay, Pete, welcome back.
Welcome back. Let's talk about something I found very interesting on Netflix.
It's actually it's a recommendation that you made to me.
Yeah, well, let's not say recommendation. Let's just say I pointed it out.
Okay.
Because I found it interesting, in today, let's say in the last couple of months especially, we've been getting more and more hyped up for The Boys, which is returning on Amazon Prime.
Oh, when's that coming back?
Oh, that's coming back, I think, in June. It starts in June, and it's 8 episodes, and it goes from June through July.
Cannot be fast enough. Be fast enough. I'm super excited about that.
And then we just experienced Peacemaker.
I love Peacemaker.
On HBO Max. So I think we should talk a little bit about Guardians of Justice, which I think is like Netflix version of a dark / dystopian / quote unquote realistic view on a superhero team, right? So we had Peacemaker with HBO. We have The Boys with Amazon. And I think Netflix said, hey, we need to get in on this superhero action.
They really felt left out. They've got, There's Marvel, there's DC, there's Amazon, right? And so, HBO is even in on it. And Netflix is like, wait a second, guys, we are first. Oh, where's our superhero show?
Exactly. So I think, so it just caught my eye. I have never heard of the showrunner, Adi Shankar. I don't know anything about him, but then I did a little bit of digging on him, and it seems like he's known for being a very cheap, and I'd use that term actually quite complimentarily, is that he's known for stretching a dollar as far as it can go.
Doing more with less.
Exactly.
Value for money. Yeah.
And looking at the show, you can definitely see it. Again, not a bad thing in this case, because it's presented to us as a parody of superhero shows.
So, Pete, I mean, definitely you deserve all of the credit for finding this on Netflix and for pointing it out to me. And the way that you positioned it, I think, is absolutely right. You know, it's definitely a show about superheroes in that same vein as all the other things that we mentioned. It doesn't take itself too seriously. And definitely just by the name Guardians of Justice, you know, it kind of obviously borrows a lot of elements from, Guardians
Marvel
of the Galaxy,
and DC,
Justice League, right? So I have to say my expectations were pretty high going into this. Do you want to give me your thoughts, or do you think we should do ratings right off the bat now?
Yeah, I think what we can do is let's do a quick a quick review, and then you can decide if you want to continue. The viewers can decide if you want to watch it. Yeah. And then you can come back and listen. We can just do a very, shallow dive on it. There's not much of a plot that I'm going to ruin for you, but there are a few things that I think are very interesting about this show.
I agree. So tell me, you want me to go first, or do you want to go first? What's your rating on this?
Well, I'll be short and sweet. My rating is mooch.
Okay.
I don't think you should ignore it, but I certainly don't think that if you don't have a Netflix account, you should go out and get one for this show.
I hear you. My rating is to skip. I don't give that rating lightly. There are some redeeming elements in it. But to be honest, I think that if you skipped the series, you would not miss any pop culture references. You would not miss anything innovative or creative. There'd be no void in your life because of that.
Ooh, damning words.
Damning words indeed.
Nighthawk would be so disappointed.
Yeah. So now for the folks that have seen this or don't mind the spoilers, tell me what you like about it that you thought it's kind of worth your time to mooch or to listen to watch.
So I think and this is going to sound super controversial. I don't think this is a hot take, but I think it's going to come off as a hot take. But I actually think that Adi Shankar has pulled off a superhero depiction of Batman better than some of the Batman movies have done in recent history.
Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
okay,
and you
know
don't
what?
think
That
that's
is
a hot take? And you don't think that's
what?
a hot take?
that I take that back. That actually might be a hot take.
Yeah. Going strong.
Yeah. Look, the whole show is framed as a dark parody, right?
Yeah.
And when I say dark, I literally mean not just in terms of cinematography, but I also mean dark as in like it touches upon issues of suicide. It touches upon drug use.
Yeah.
It's not what your typical
it's grisly,
superhero,
right? It's really grisly.
Very grisly. It's not what your typical superhero comic is about.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'll give the creators credit. And they do deserve a lot of credit, where they've looked at the universe of what's out there in terms of all the other superhero franchises, and they probably rightly decided that it's really hard to compete in that world. Peacemaker was so good, and that's pretty dark. Deadpool is pretty dark, and that was good. We just saw Spider-Man. We know about all the different DC films coming out. There's obviously, you mentioned The Boys is coming back. I think that's a very, very crowded market, and I give them credit for going in a little bit of a different direction and definitely doing something different and unique that stands out from all the other things. I can see for the right person that being really interesting and compelling, but for me, it just didn't hit. It's just kind of that simple.
Exactly. And this is why I give it a mooch and not a must subscribe, in the sense that you really need to be submerged in this culture of superhero comics. What this show does really good is that let's give a very brief recap. You have the Superman-like figure, Marvelous Man, who on television commits suicide. And the rest of the show is about the Justice League, not the Guardians of Justice, which is obviously a very, very clear homage and parody of the Justice League, right? Yep. You have a Flash type character, you have the Batman type character, you have all the kinds of characters that you see, including like a Green Arrow style character. All of them are in there. And the Batman character, who's called Nighthawk, gives himself the mission of figuring out why he killed himself. Was it an actual suicide? Was there a murder? What's going on here? Yeah. Right?
So Pete, do you think it's a blessing or a curse where you have these new characters, right? I mean, the Batman-like character is named Nighthawk, right? The Flash-like character is named The Speed. I mean, these are not, I mean, you kind of know, as you mentioned, who they pay homage to. Do you think it's better or more difficult to kind of create this new intellectual property and give all these multiple new characters an identity, right off the bat, all at the same time? That's a tough trick to pull off, right?
It is. I think I understand what you're saying, but I think what these guys are talking, or what these guys have done, is to say, hey, look, it's not so much about the characters as individual character identities, but their roles in not just this league of superheroes, but also in terms of what they are like in what they would perceive as the real world, right? So Nighthawk, for example, obviously Batman, obviously a very tortured individual, but you see his dedication to justice, that right? He's willing to almost sacrifice his brain to figure out the murder mystery. He's willing to sacrifice his body to figure out who did it. He's willing to go up against literal gods in this universe to do everything, right?
Yeah. Did you watch the whole season? It's 7 episodes, correct?
I did. So it's interesting because after I watched the first episode, I was very I was very uninterested because it looked cheap.
Yeah.
It looked like a really cheap parody, and I wasn't interested. It wasn't something that I was keen on, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is the curse that Marvel and DC have bestowed upon any superhero related entertainment, things.
They
right?
set the bar high.
Movies, TV
The bar
shows,
is set
they
high.
set the bar.
Yeah.
When you're looking at any kind of TV show, any kind of movie, even the TV shows now, the quality of the visual effects is so good, right? The sound effects is so good. And I think what Adi Shankar said was, look, I don't have a budget of $10 million an episode or $5 million an episode or whatever Peacemaker's budget was, right? I probably have that one episode of budget that Peacemaker has for the entire 7 episodes, right? So how do I stretch it? I know what I do. Instead of having my characters go to 30 different locations and have all these other supporting actors, I can animate a lot of it.
Yeah.
I can do puppetry for a lot of it. I can do claymation and stop motion for a lot of it, which is it's a blend of different visual styles.
You're right.
Which at first was very jarring for me.
Yeah.
Right? But once you get into it, you kind of ignore that, and it gives them a little bit more creative flexibility or creative freedom to do the things that they actually want to do.
Yeah. So, Pete, there's a while ago where I asked you, if you're an established actor and, you were offered a part in, Marvel or DC, would you accept it? And you said, in a heartbeat, and you rattled off a list of very, very good reasons why, right?
Yeah.
If Netflix comes to you and says, hey, Pete, we want you to be this new superhero in season 2 of this, do you accept it? Or do you say, nah, it's too cheesy, or nah, I'm going to hold out for one of the larger universes? Where do you fall on that now? So
I'm going to really sound like a jerk on this, but I would literally I would choose to see what the critical reception of this show is.
Yeah.
Because if you look at it, almost all the actors who are in this show are not even B tier or C tier. They're like D tier actors.
Whoa,
right?
I'm sorry. Denise Richards, Jane Seymour have issues with that statement.
Okay, fine. C tier actors. All right. I apologize to all our Denise Richards fans.
That includes me, by the way. That includes me. and Jane Seymour fans.
Sure, but I mean,
I agree though. You're not wrong. There's absolutely no
Diamond Dallas Page, right? I mean, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like
there's no A tier. There can be an entirely different episode about what constitutes a B tier or C tier, or even if those things do exist. But I think it's
right.
It's absolutely an accurate statement. I don't even think Jane Seymour would argue that she's no longer A tier.
Right, so I think it's a situation where a show like this is the perfect vehicle for those characters or for those actors who have certainly not made a splash in Hollywood's A-list or even B-list, right? And so they're able to say, hey, if this show becomes a critical success, at least maybe my agent will have an easier time getting me a quote-unquote real role. Whatever that means, right? I'm just saying that if I were a young actor and they come to me and say, hey, Pete, are you interested in playing the Dark Hawks or Nighthawks? See, that's what I'm saying. It's such a generic name that it's, so...
The Dark Nighthawk,
Yeah, if you're going to be Nighthawk's super partner / ward, kind of akin to Robin or Nightwing, would you be interested?
Yeah.
The first thing I'd do is go to Metacritic. I'd read all the trades. I'd see, hey, how did this show do? Was it a critical success?
Yeah. I think the fact that it's on Netflix probably has a lot to do with this. If this is more of an independent and it was maybe syndicated or something like this, I think you'd have a pretty good argument for saying, hey, this isn't for me. The fact that it's on Netflix means it's probably going to get a good amount of traffic and views. And I agree, unless you're a young actress, and you're really willing to bet on yourself long term that, Marvel or DC is just around the corner, I probably agree with you. I think you probably jump at it.
Yeah, and I think so. I'd look at it that way. I also think that if you're a young guy, it's really rare to be someone like Ben Affleck or Ryan Reynolds, which is to say, someone who's transcended, or it's not transcended, but switched teams from DC to Marvel or Marvel to DC, whatever it is, right? It's really rare, even though the list of actors isn't that big, or let's say the list of super well-known famous actors isn't that big. It's still rare for you to see characters or actors switching teams, right?
Yeah.
If you want to say that.
Yeah.
So my thing is that, do I want to be potentially up for a Marvel or even a DC role, and then have them go through my IMDb page and realize, oh, well, Pete was already Nightwing's terrible parody in season 2 of Guardians of Justice, and we don't want to be associated with that, so let's just throw him off the casting sheet.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. I'd jump at it otherwise, but I think I'd also, like you rightly said, I'd want to bet on myself, which is to say, hey, I'm going to hold off on this, because even though Netflix gets 1 million views or billions of views or whatever that number is, I'd rather hold out for the chance of actually hitting it big in cinemas versus just on the small screen.
Yeah. I mean, I think the reality...
At least for this genre.
Yeah.
At least for this genre.
I think you're right. I mean, I think the reality is also that, for the majority of working actors, I mean, they could be very successful. They could be making a very good living, but you still need a steady stream of parts, to pay the bill and to get your name out there. And if you go too long without anything on your diary, that's probably also a bad sign as well. So unless there's a blockbuster that's already penciled in, and as you know, these things are penciled in, years in advance, right?
Years in advance. So, yes, that's exactly right.
So, I mean, if you don't have anything on your diary in 2023 or 2024, there's probably nothing else, coming your way. So, okay. Overall.
Yeah. So I think, in any case, the going back very quickly to, before we end this, the quick hot take action of this was...
Let's hear it.
So, with the exception of Matt Reeves' The Batman, every Batman depiction we've seen has always either told us outright or implied to us that, Batman is an excellent detective.
True.
But we never actually, or very rarely, do we see him do any detective work, right? Again, I'm not including the TV series. The animated show did a very good job of that, and to a certain extent, even so did Batman 66 with Adam West. Yeah. But barring a short scene here or there, most recently in Christian Bale's Batman, right, where he's deducing who the Joker potentially was, or, in that Dark Knight scene where he's reconstructing the bullet, you don't see much detective work. Here, you see a lot of detective work. He's going out. He's doing interrogations. He's meeting with criminals. He's shaking people down for information. He's trying to solve a mystery.
Yep.
Right? And again, with the exception of Battinson, we haven't really seen that.
We have not.
Kudos to Adi Shankar for doing that.
Yep.
Because that really is the essence of Batman is, hey, I'm a detective, but I'm also a pragmatist. I will do what's good. I will do what I need to do for the greater good, even if it means killing me, or even if it means I have to cross the line, right? Because he won't cross the line before killing people, and that's where, this parody kind of goes a little off the rails, as it were, right? Because he says that, when I got to the line, I realized there was no line, or something like that. There's some cheesy line like that, right? And so he goes off on his quote-unquote murder spree. But, I don't know. I just, that knowing that it's a parody of Batman, or at least Batman's version of Justice League, I thought that was a very good depiction.
So it may
But again,
be
not good enough to highlight
Yeah.
that you should subscribe.
I mean, this may be a very timely release by Netflix. It's very strategically released. After Spider-Man, now we've all seen No Way Home. Batman obviously had its opening weekend and week. As you mentioned, we're in that lull
Did very well
before the new Boys comes out or is released by Amazon, and after now Peacemaker is wrapped up. There's a little bit of a lull. So if ever there's a time that you could probably get folks like you and me interested in something like this, now is the time. So I have to say, well done to Netflix for launching it, when there's not a lot of other noise that's going to, detract potential viewers from it.
Right. And even if it's not the hit that you want it to be, again, as you rightly pointed out, because of this lull, it certainly did attract my attention. Right? And it certainly will have attracted the attention of others. Now, whether it succeeds or not is a wholly different question. And only time will tell, but I can tell you that I saw it and I was interested on my recommended queue, and I was instantly interested in this because, well, what else am I going to watch? I don't have another superhero movie or TV show for at least another 2 months. And now, a word from our friends at AJ Chat.
AJ Chat is a podcast about movies, TV shows, anything in the entertainment field. And along the way, we have some fantastic interviews. And of course, always a must have fun. So, check out AJ Chat.
So you know what? If you don't mind me switching gears on you a little bit, Pete, what you just said about the Netflix recommended queue, I have to give you a very good experience I had. And it was after I started watching Guardians of Justice. I actually stopped. I think there's 7 episodes. I think I stopped after 4 because something else in my feed caught my attention. And I mentioned this before, but it's called Travelers.
Yeah. So I've seen it it's on my list to watch, but only after you messaged me and said I have to watch it.
Yeah. So Travelers is a little bit dated, to be honest. I think it's a 2018 show. I've never heard of it before. And to be honest, I originally thought that it was Rob Lowe who was starring in it, but it actually turns out that the dude's name is Eric McCormick, who you may know better as
Will and Grace?
Will from Will and Grace,
Yeah.
who is, to be honest, when you look at him next to Rob Lowe, they're very, very similar kind of metrosexually, like good-looking dudes, right?
Everyone's got a doppelganger.
Everyone's got a doppelganger. Well, exactly right. Everyone's got a doppelganger. Bryce Dallas Howard and Jessica Chastain, right?
Yep.
Among others. So I caught Travelers when I was kind of not sure if I wanted to go forward with another episode of Guardians of Justice. I was just kind of like scrolling down. I saw Travelers, and I think just like you, I'm just like a nut for like time travel, right? I mean, ever since Back to the Future, which we have to incorporate in this conversation in a few minutes, but ever since Back to the Future, I think time travel shows and movies, there's just something super fascinating about them, right? It's just one of those topics like zombies, like pandemics, right? Time travel is just kind of one of those topics that automatically you can kind of build a good series or film around. So I started watching Travelers, and I know that this isn't a deep dive or a breakdown into it, but I have to say, it's definitely a mooch. I am almost ready to say that it's worth subscribing to Netflix on its own. I have to say, it is extraordinarily compelling to me. And again, I'm not going to do spoilers, but if you'll give me just a few minutes, let me just give a recap to kind of put in perspective a little bit of the plot.
Absolutely.
So this is actually set in the year, in modern day. So again, I think this was 2018 at the time, which given the COVID pandemic seems like time stood still for the last 3 years. So it's kind of like watching something today. But there's a group of humans from the future, who are called travelers, and they are sent back in order to alter some events to prevent, not the end of the world, but some events from damaging, the earth and the environment. It's not necessarily an environmental movie, but it basically says that the earth is in a very bad place in the future. And a group of travelers are sent back to, try to, change a course of events so that those things don't take place. Now there's two interesting things, and then I'll kind of leave it at that, which is the first is that in the future, there's apparently no government. Instead, there's a AI, which they call the director. And this director actually makes all the decisions in terms of, who is sent back, what specifically their mission should be, and so on and so forth, which I think is very interesting. And everyone pledges allegiance to the director, not so much like as a religious allegiance, but more in the sense that, hey, it's good to have like an objective voice making rational decisions, no favoritism kind of thing. And then the second part is that there's a lot of different cells, if you will, each kind of operating a little bit independently. Occasionally they clash, occasionally they cooperate in order to, kind of get these objectives or missions done. And no one really has full visibility in terms of what they're doing or why they're doing, which is kind of the director's, objective in all of this. So there's a lot of, I think, interesting scenarios that come up. And there's also a little bit of humor because, a lot of all the folks from the future who are now transported into, basically new bodies in present day, have their own kind of like day-to-day challenges, which they're a little bit, unequipped for. So it's not intended to be like, ha ha, laugh out loud kind of funny, but it's intended to be kind of humorous, some of the, the day-to-day things that they encounter in life and just kind of making observations about how silly this is or how inconvenient this is or why did they do it this way kind of thing. So I have to say I give a very, very high recommendation to travelers, almost to the point of saying that it's worthy of subscribing to Netflix only for this show, but absolutely it's a mooch in my opinion.
Very, very high praise, eh?
Thank you.
So it is an older series, but it's definitely on my list to watch.
Yeah.
And you never know. I mean, I don't know what the ending's like. Obviously, I don't think if you've not finished it, I don't think you do either. But
there's
if
3
there's
seasons
for it to come back, I hope it does.
Yeah, there's 3 seasons, and I am on the start of season 2. So I don't think it's going to be renewed further. I think it's probably done after 3. I mean, it's been 2018, so unless they're suddenly bringing it back, or I think it's done after 3 now.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think we always need the queue to kind of have a few things like topped up, right? And I think that's probably really important, which is you could have something that you're binge watching, but there's times that either you're not in the mood. And for me, there's times that I like to watch things, sometimes in the background. There's the shows that I get geared up for, and I'm like, look, I need absolutely silence. I need, the shades drawn. I need the lights off. I need my popcorn. I need like everything perfect because I really want to focus on this. And then there's times where I'm like, look, I'm not in the mood to give something 100% of my attention, but I definitely need something in the background, whether I'm eating or chatting on email or something like that. I don't know if this necessarily falls into that category, but I think it's important to have a queue that has a few little things kind of teed up so that when you do need something, You're not spending 15, 20 minutes kind of looking for the right thing, or recommendations, or, making any false starts and wasting time as well, right?
Right.
So that should be something we do as well, is try to give some recommendations on things to add to the queue. And Travelers, for me, is definitely one of those.
Excellent.
Called a queue filler.
A queue filler. I like that. I really do.
So that's Guardians of Justice. That's Travelers. What else are you watching, Pete?
What else am I watching at the moment? Oh, I'll tell you what. I just saw the first episode of Winning Time.
Oh, right? Yeah, so did I. About the Lakers.
About the Lakers, the start of the quote-unquote Lakers dynasty.
Yes.
I know that you and I both confuse it often with the word Showtime.
Because I thought it was Showtime. Yeah.
You know what it is? I have a sneaking suspicion that it was going to be called Showtime because in the trailer for the first episode, they kind of make it clear, or they kind of allude to the fact that it's going to be called Showtime, but I suspect it wasn't able to get some kind of clearance from legal or something like that after the show was done being produced. And so, because of, the actual channel, right? Showtime channel. So I think they changed it to Winning Time for that.
You're right, because it's based on a book, and a book is called Showtime. But you're right. I think the fact that it was on HBO obviously, repositioned that argument. So a book called Showtime probably doesn't have the same intellectual property positioning that, a show on HBO, who obviously competes with Showtime channel, does. So that makes sense.
Yeah, but I did see the first episode. I think I'm going to enjoy. I have a sneaking suspicion I'm going to really enjoy this series.
Yeah,
it's
so it's not about. Can we say this is not so much about basketball? This is not. I mean, it's about the Lakers. The most prominent, NBA professional basketball team, but it's not so much about basketball that like someone like my mom wouldn't be able to enjoy the plot as well, right? There's a basketball element to it, but it's not really about basketball. Do you agree?
I agree. I hope that's correct.
Yes.
Because we've only seen the first episode, I'm certain we're going to go through at least the first season of Magic Johnson in the NBA.
Yes.
How much the show pivots or dives into the actual basketball to be determined at this stage. But where it's at right now, I fully agree. Basketball happens to be the sport they're talking about.
Yes.
But it's not really about basketball. You could replace it with curling for all I care.
Yes.
And it would still be interesting to watch because it's about how the team has been acquired. It's about the struggles that ownership has with management. It's about, the financing. It's about all these little nuances of team ownership and team management coming together. And of course, the glue that holds it all together is the fact that it's the Lakers, which, even if you're not a basketball fan, you've heard of the Lakers.
You've heard of the Lakers.
Even if you're living outside of America, you have a vague idea of who Magic Johnson is because he's one of those guys who transcends sports, right? Yeah, there are very few of them in many countries. Yeah. There are very few of them. I would think Magic Johnson's one of them. In fact, I think Magic Johnson's one of them, and maybe Larry Bird isn't.
I would say Magic Johnson, apart from maybe like when you think of like boxing, right? And like someone like Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
And
or Mike Tyson.
And Mike Tyson, Magic Johnson may be kind of one of the first to really be a globally known phenomenon. I mean, if we were talking about like British football, right? Soccer to Americans, you would even say like, the famous like footballers, right? Argentina's, Maradona. Messi. Or even like Brazil's Pele, they probably weren't known really in America mainstream in the 80s, whereas someone like Magic Johnson was probably known in China, Japan, Europe, throughout the world in the 80s, So
I don't know if he's known that way that early. I think I have a sneaking suspicion, actually, that Michael Jordan was the first NBA player to really be well known.
Yeah,
globally.
that's right. Yeah, that's right.
I think, I still, when I think of Michael Jordan, I still think of him in, I think it was 92
Barcelona.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, in the Olympics.
Yeah.
So when you see that massive billboard of Michael Jordan doing his signature dunk, and that billboard is the size of the building, right?
Yes.
So it's like 200 feet tall. Magic Johnson never had that.
Yeah.
In America, certainly. But I think globally, it's Michael Jordan. Having said that, for the sport, for those who follow basketball, I think he is one of the first.
I think so. Yeah. So there's two other pieces, I think, of drama in this. And the first one is, and you pointed this out to me, the owner of the Lakers, Dr. Jerry Buss, right?
Yeah.
Is played by John C. Reilly. And apparently he wasn't the first actor to have that role. Someone else was cast. That person dropped out. John C. Reilly was chosen. And this created like some drama, right?
Yeah, so the show is, I don't know if it's written or directed or produced. I'm pretty sure it's produced, or at least executive produced by Adam McKay.
Yeah.
And Adam McKay's partner, not just in terms of writing, but in terms of cinema, in terms of film for the last 2 decades, more or less, has been Will Ferrell. And not almost everything, and not everything, but like a majority of the movies they've done together, that Adam McKay has done, he's always thought of Will Ferrell first.
So he's, right? I'm just looking at him quickly. Anchorman, Talladega Nights. Yeah.
There's a strong partnership, let's put it that way, between the two of them.
Yeah.
And I heard that when they were looking for Dr. Buss, the replacement for who was going to play him, he went with John C. Reilly because in terms of looks, in terms of acting, he thought that John C. Reilly was more aligned to him than Will Ferrell. And I heard that I read anyway, that Will Ferrell took offense to that because maybe most people don't know this, but Will Ferrell is a massive sports fan.
He's a huge Lakers fan, right? He's a
gigantic basketball fan and the Lakers. Man. So I think that he took offense to the fact that Adam McKay didn't go to him first to say, I want you to play Buss. And that actually caused them to have a rift, and they broke their partnership up. That's how big the rift was.
First things first. I think John C. Reilly plays that role exceptionally. I know we've only seen one episode, but I'm fully bought into him playing that role. I think he's already done it super well. And I can also see, I guess, from the perspective of Will Ferrell, that you've got a partner, you do everything together. This is something that you'd love to be a part of. I mean, I'm not sure how he found out, but assuming that he didn't kind of get the call first saying, hey, don't get mad, but I'm going to ask someone else to take this role, I can see how he'd feel like super, a little bit betrayed by that thing.
Yeah, but it's also, I mean, with all due credit to them, it's not like Will Ferrell is hurting for roles.
No.
And 2, it's also like, kind of like Will Ferrell has also starred in a lot of these movies with John C. Reilly.
Yeah.
Most famously Step Brothers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right, which is a great comedy. So it's kind of like, okay, you should also be happy that your friend or, someone you've collaborated with at least so much is doing this, right? It's one thing if they said, oh, by the way, we're casting Pete or Ethan to be Dr. Buss, some nobodies out of nowhere. But, it's a bit strange that he would go, and so publicly, by the way, go after Adam McKay for this, right?
Yeah. Well, that's not our problem, but
no, it's not.
But I have to say, I thought the first episode of Winning Time is fantastic. I thought John C. Reilly was fantastic as the owner, but I think that the drama that his choice created added maybe a little bit of extra, publicity to it, and certainly got me a little bit curious about, the backstory to that.
So I think the long and the short of it is if you are a fan of the movie type that The Big Short was, which is frequent cutaways, breaking the fourth wall, explaining what's going on in layman's terms, that kind of thing, you're going to like it just on that basis.
I was just going to say, do you want to say what breaking the fourth wall is? Because that's a term that I've heard all the time, and I never know what it meant. But then when I read what it meant, then I'm like, oh, I know what that is. I just never knew it was called that.
So the idea has always been in TV and in movies that, the actors have to pretend like the cameras doesn't exist and that the audience doesn't exist. They're living in their own world, and the things that they're saying are things that their characters would naturally say, right? If they were real. So breaking the fourth wall is this concept where the actor is directly addressing the audience. And in that moment, being fully aware that that character, is a fictional character or a stylized character, and is explaining something to the audience that maybe the audience wouldn't have understood otherwise. Very effective, for example, it's very effectively used in The Big Short, which is a movie about finance, right? The core of Big Short is finance, and your average person isn't very well versed on finance, right? So they use people like Anthony Bourdain and other Selena Gomez and all these other actors and celebrities to explain complicated things to the audience in layman's terms. And then you can also use it as a comedic trope, as we see in Deadpool, where Deadpool, generally speaking, in the comics will address the reader directly, or on the TV shows will address the viewers, or in the movie will address the viewers directly. So it's a nice little way of introducing either complicated ideas, or it's a way of, introducing comedy to a certain aspect of the film. So in this case, it's very interesting. They're using that concept of breaking the fourth wall to, explain, a little bit on the comedic side, right? So he's like, I have the money, I'm ready. And then he turns to the camera and he goes, I don't have the money. You're right? Funny things.
Yeah. A lot like, it's a little bit like Arrested Development, which doesn't have the speaking into the camera. It has like the narrator in the background, where the same thing where someone say like, oh, don't worry, I have the money. And I think it was Ron Howard who narrates and says he did not have the money.
Exactly. So I think it's a very good thing. So in any case, before we get too sidetracked, based on the first episode alone, if I were forced to recommend, and looking at Adam McKay's past, looking at John C. Reilly, looking at the cast they've assembled, which, by the way, excellent cast. Everyone looks like their counterparts.
Yes.
Surprisingly so, right?
Dramatically so.
So, on that basis alone, I would very much say it's a subscribe to HBO Max. I will caveat that by saying I caveat that by saying this is based purely on episode 1. There's still another 7-9 episodes to go, however long it is. So we will definitely recap it at the end of the season, and we'll definitely do an episode on that just so that we can confirm or change.
So I agree with you. If I had, I have HBO Plus, or I have HBO Max. If after watching that first episode, I agree with you. I would have subscribed to the whole thing because I think that the remainder of the series is going to be equally well done. And there's one other thing that's interesting, which is, the two main the two main players on the Lakers are Magic Johnson, as you mentioned, who's a rookie out of Michigan State University when this show begins. And then Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who's been with the Lakers, for a few years. And then HBO Max also in my feed gave me a recommendation, and there was a biography or a documentary, I should say. It's a documentary because Kareem is interviewed about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And I have to say, I knew a lot of the highlights about Kareem, but I didn't know a lot of backstory. And the documentary was actually pretty well done. And it puts a lot of the things that you see in this first episode of the Lakers into perspective. Because when you start this first season or this first episode, Kareem is already on the Lakers. He's kind of their established star, but he's known to be very moody or mercurial, right?
Right.
And it's not clear why, and then I watched this documentary and it kind of showed, it wasn't really his upbringing, but it was the fact that, to be honest, he was a 7'2" teenager. And basically everyone gave him so much attention, and he was a little bit of a shy, polite kid. And he's like, look, I just want to be left alone. I don't want everyone to comment on my height when I see them. I don't want everyone to ask me, how's the weather up there when they see me? Just because I'm tall doesn't give everyone the license, to engage me and make comments. And this was obviously a different era as well. There was no social media. There was nothing, right? He was just, right. I felt after watching this documentary that he was just really exhausted by the amount of unsolicited comments, jokes, things that were made to him. And as a result, he became very defensive and just didn't really want to interact with anyone at all. He wanted to be kind of left alone, rather than put up with the same joke that he's probably heard literally, 10,000 or more times,
Right.
So I thought that which was on HBO and was a pretty good recommendation, obviously based on me watching the first episode of Winning Time. I thought that was pretty helpful for me to kind of understand why the Kareem that we were introduced to in this episode, was so moody and, to be honest, kind of an asshole, right?
Right. It would be interesting to see, because you're right. I don't actually know. There are very few sports stars where you know a lot about them outside of their sports. Yeah. Outside of their exploits in the arenas that they play in. Yeah. Right? If you ask me, if you look at the best footballers in the world right now, right? Yeah. If you're going to ask me what's Cristiano Ronaldo like off the pitch or Lionel Messi, I don't know. No. I honestly don't know, because I like football, don't get me wrong, but I am not the biggest football fan, such that I will go and do research externally, right? Yeah. And the only reason I know as much as I do about someone like Michael Jordan is because of his Last Dance docu-series, which was so well done, so incredibly well done.
Very true.
And again, not a big basketball fan. Or at least not enough to go and say, hey, let me Wikipedia Michael Jordan and let me see where he grew up and what he was like as a kid. None of that. Yeah. So I think that it's these kinds of shows which have, I don't want to say they have a societal burden on them, but they kind of do, in the sense that for people like me, I look at something like Winning Time as potential for me to learn more about Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, for example, or any of the other basketball players in there, or even the people like Jeannie Buss, who she's already been introduced. She's
as a kid,
one of the most instrumental people in the NBA today, right? I acknowledge that, but I don't know anything about her except for the fact that I think she's dating or is engaged to Phil Jackson, something like that. That's all I know.
Yeah. There's one other thing, we should say about Magic Johnson, where we were debating just a few minutes ago about whether or not he was kind of the first transcendent basketball player. Maybe not, but he was probably, do you remember when he announced that he had AIDS or HIV? Yeah. That was a really transcendent moment, I think. Yeah. Maybe even worldwide, right? He was a celebrity. It was Los Angeles. It was so many things. And AIDS, I think at that point had like a very negative stigma in terms of, who was primarily infected. He really put kind of a name to that epidemic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And we see a little bit of that. I think that's what they kind of alluded to in that first scene. Do you remember
that very opening scene?
Yeah. Exactly. They didn't say it, but I think Which I think is actually the brilliance of filmmaking, right? When you can portray something without actually saying it, I think that's very powerful, right? And the way that they had like everyone kind of like not making eye contact with him, you know, he was trying to smile, but you could see it was a forced smile, and he was, you know, delicately ushered out of what clearly seemed to be like a doctor's office after some type of, you know, like, you know, test result or, you know, something like that. That was, I felt absolutely that's what that was leading to, is kind of like a flash forward. But I thought that's the most powerful storytelling, is when you can portray a scene and everyone knows what you're talking about, and you don't have to kind of insult anyone's intelligence by having a doctor walk in and say, well, Mr. Johnson, I've got your test results for the HIV, you know, sample we just took, right? And it's like, you don't have to say the obvious, you know, everyone kind of knew what you were talking about. So that's powerful.
I agree. I very much agree.
So we look forward to continuing on Winning Time. Put Travelers in your queue. Guardians of Justice. You've heard my perspective. You heard Pete's perspective. Manage yourself accordingly, right?
Agreed. I think that if you've got Netflix and if you've got spare time, if you're a comic book fan or, you know, an aficionado of the genre,
yes,
you know, look past the quote unquote cheapness of it and the cheesiness of it. I think there's something there.
Yep.
But, you know, if you don't have Netflix, don't go subscribing to it just for this show.
Yep. So, okay, next episode, we're staying with the Netflix theme. What are we talking about on the next episode? Just to give a quick teaser.
To give a quick teaser, you briefly touched upon it when you spoke about Back to the Future, but we're going to be talking about another time-traveling movie that just dropped on Netflix. The Adam Project.
So, stay tuned for next time. Thank you. Peace out.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Films and Stuff. If you haven't already, please subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are downloaded. Films and Stuff. There is no substitute.